me at the Musial with Alan and Daniel. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. Everyone come gather round, listen to your favorite sound. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We'll talk the games and all the rest, about the team that we love best. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
Good evening. Welcome into another edition of Meet Me at Musial. I'm your host, Daniel Shoptaw at C70. Joining me this week, you know him from Sports Open Line and Gas House Gang over on KMOX. It's Matt Pauley. You can find him at Matt Pauley on air. Matt, how are you tonight?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on the program. Appreciate you welcoming me back on.
It's always good to have you to come on. And I think more than anybody, I think you have a connection to fans because of Open Line that maybe a lot of media folks don't. I mean, you really get to hear from people and know what the fan base is thinking a lot of times.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that because it's actually something I think about a lot because I know I try to figure out, and I haven't figured it out, but I'm always trying to figure it out. I try to figure out like what the majority of people are thinking at any given moment. And if you go off social media or Twitter, you're not getting the majority thought. We know that. If you judge just off the phone calls and the text messages you get because you're hosting a sports talk show or you're hosting a post game show, I also don't think that is representative of the majority because most people listen to a radio show and they would never, ever, ever consider calling or texting or tweeting or anything. So I think you're kind of right in the sense that I have more than other people because of how much interaction I have, but I don't know if I have yet to really get the full sense of what the majority feeling of the fan base is.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. That's fair, especially when this is a fan base that stretches through many a state. And like you said, there's probably 70-80% of this fan base never expresses an opinion to anybody but the guy next door and the barber, right? I mean, they're not getting online, they're not calling in, they're not being part of anything like that. So it becomes difficult to judge how those kind of people are thinking about everything that's going on.
Yeah, I like to take note of what's going on when people don't know who I am and I'm in spots where people are talking about the Cardinals and I kind of eavesdrop in those situations because I feel like those are the moments where I get a better idea. If I'm this is gonna sound like weird, but like if I'm shopping at Costco or something on a Saturday and I hear people talking about the Cardinals, I might linger in the freezer section for a minute or two longer to hear how that conversation goes, just because, just for that reason, I want to know what people are thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. I think I may have mentioned this last week with Jeff Jones, but my dad, I still work with my dad, and so he's followed the Cardinals longer than I've been alive. But he's not, as deeply into it. So what he thinks and what he hears and what he's questioning about is often slightly different or significantly different than what we're seeing online, especially. So it's interesting because here again, like you say, generations are a huge thing in Cardinal Nation.
They are, and my dad asks me questions all the time, and like for example, the Arenado trade this past week, he calls me up and he said, "Well, are the Cardinals just not trying?" And we had a conversation, and I explained what I thought. I'm not trying to sound arrogant, like I'm the end all and be all, but I told him what I thought it was and why it happened and how it was leading up, and I think for people like you or me that are kind of in this on an everyday basis and watching the team and knowing what's going on and on social media and all that stuff, well, the idea of Nolan Arenado getting traded, it's like, okay, well, finally that happened. But for people who watch the games and might read a newspaper article every once in a while and just sort of are not super connected, that all of a sudden Arenado gets traded and the team's picking up 3/4 of the salary and they're getting a prospect that nobody's really heard of. It can be shocking and jarring. And I need to remind myself at times that there's going to be people who are taking me in on KMOX. Maybe the Arenado trade was, or, they say to themselves, you know what, I don't generally listen to Sports Open Line, but I don't get this. So I'm going to listen to Matt, and Matt's going to explain what's happening. I need to make sure that I'm always there for the people who are just at the surface level so they understand why it's happening.
Yeah. And that's a great approach to take, because there are so many more of those than the people that need the deep dive. Deep dives are good too, obviously, but you've got to remember people got to know before you can deep dive. So that seems to be the good transition point then to talk about the big news of the week: Nolan Arenado getting traded to Arizona. When you were explaining this, how did you react to this?
I kind of said finally, because we've been doing, it was, as somebody who's, my job is to talk about the team. I like talking about new stuff. So the fact that we have spent the better part of the last year plus 2 years, however long it's been, talking about potential Nolan Arenado trades, I'm glad that's in the rearview mirror. I'm glad that we don't have to have the conversation anymore from people who say, well, the Cardinals shouldn't trade Arenado, because I always like to deal in realities. And was there a scenario where it played out exactly the same way that it played out last year, and they just didn't work out a deal, and he kind of ends up stuck on the Cardinals again? Yeah, like that could have happened. The percentage chance of that happening was very low. It was also very low last year, and it did happen. So you leave the door open for that possibility. But I felt like we spent a lot of time, and it was wasted time, for lack of a better term, I think, because it wasn't based in reality. We spent way too much time discussing whether or not the Cardinals should trade Arenado. Well, they wanted to. He wanted them to. He wanted a new spot. They wanted to get him a new spot. There's lots of reasons for both sides for it to happen. So when we're sitting here having these conversations, arguments, discussions, whatever you want to call them, about should the Cardinals trade Nolan Arenado, it's a fruitless conversation, because we've already crossed this line where they are going to do everything they can to trade Arenado. And whether you think they should or shouldn't actually doesn't matter at this point, because it's not something that's really up for debate.
Yeah. That's fair. It's to pull another one, maybe it's a different conversation with Brendan Donovan, because the Cardinals have said, they haven't said, hey, we've got to trade him, and Donovan hasn't said, hey, I want to move out. With Arenado, you're right. I didn't want to see him gone. I really enjoyed having Nolan Arenado as a Cardinal, but it was a situation where the team and the player thought it was best. And so if you can find a situation, which they did, you have to go for it. And I think that it also probably helps a little bit to keep, we've seen it over the last, I know you probably have, especially, but over the last little bit on Twitter, the last year or two, people have turned somewhat on Nolan Arenado, not just because of that, lack of production and the fact that things didn't get done last year.
Yeah. That's interesting. Okay, so I don't know if it's a higher percentage or not. There are people who are anti-Arenado for some reason. I don't get it. I can tell you, there was an individual, I would recognize his phone number on the text line. Arenado would make a mistake in the field. He would commit an error, he would not make a play or something. And you could set your watch by it. Within 30 seconds of that happening, there is going to be a text on the KMOX text line telling you that Arenado is not a winning player, and this is why he should have never been a Cardinal in the first place. Didn't matter how many runs he saved in the field, how many incredible plays he made. Didn't matter, and I'm only talking defense here, because obviously from an offensive standpoint, he was not a plus player. But from a defensive standpoint, we can all agree he was still a very good defensive third baseman. Not what he was previously, not the best defensive third baseman walking the face of the earth, but still really, really good. Top third in Major League Baseball defensively. And there were people out there that, for whatever reason, and I think sometimes his body language rubbed people the wrong way, where he was so intense and he so badly wanted to win, and he wore everything. Like he did not keep anything inside. You could see the frustration. And I think part of that, for whatever reason, I think there were some people that took that the wrong way, and I'm not sure what the wrong way actually was, but for some people, they did not like that, and they disliked him. Now, I I still think more people really loved him and really appreciated him than the other. I think that's one of the things I feel pretty confident on. I think the majority of the Cardinal fan base appreciated him. And two things can be true. You can love Nolan Arenado, you can appreciate who he's been, you can appreciate the fact that he's going to be going to the Baseball Hall of Fame, and for many of us of a certain age, it is without a doubt that he is the greatest defensive third baseman of our lifetime. And for those of us who it's a little bit older, it's a conversation, but he's in the conversation for the best of all time. You can say that at one point in time, if I was starting a Major League Baseball team, when we're talking about like 2022, 2021, 2020, those years of Arenado, he would have been the guy, my first guy to pick to start a team with, a plus player at an important defensive position, and then one of the better offensive profiles in Major League Baseball. His decline started a little bit sooner than most people thought it was going to happen, and it got to a point where it just made sense for him not to be in the organization. So I don't think somebody like me, I agreeing with them trading Nolan Arenado, that's not me saying I don't like him as a player or don't appreciate him. Like, two things can be true. You can really, really like him and also understand that at this point it makes sense for him to be somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. And I mean, to some degree, if you really, really like him, you kind of want him to be somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
Because this is not a team that's going to contend in the next 2 years or 3 years or whatever the case may be. He goes to a team in Arizona that, is at least closer to it. I don't know if they have their own challenges, especially since the Dodgers own everybody. But they are at least going to be in the mix for a playoff position, something that he wouldn't have had in St. Louis. And I think for seeing a guy that, I mean, given his offensive numbers, probably is getting close to the end of his career, giving him a chance to go out and succeed, have a chance for that October run that he never really got in St. Louis, you'd want that for him.
You absolutely would, and I do hope it happens with the Diamondbacks. It's a really, really tough division. It's going to be hard to win it when the Dodgers are there. It feels like maybe the Padres could take a step back. It also kind of feels like maybe the Giants are going to take a step forward. The Rockies are the Rockies. But either way, I think the Diamondbacks do go into the season with an expectation that they're a playoff team, probably as a wild card. But that's a team that has playoff expectations. The Cardinals clearly don't have playoff expectations. And maybe we'll talk about this later on, but just a quick sidebar. I don't think that means could a scenario like with what happened with the Cincinnati Reds happen to the Cardinals this upcoming season. I leave that open as a possibility, but I also leave that open as the absolute ceiling for this team, where they kind of accidentally sneak into the playoffs after hovering around 500, and nobody really expected it. Like that's the ceiling for this club, where the ceiling, and it's not likely, the ceiling for the Diamondbacks is them being a legitimate playoff team all season long and maybe making some noise in the playoffs along the way.
Yeah. And I again, I think Nolan Arenado did the best he could while he was here. I appreciated his, goodbyes and everything. And from all indications, man, you can speak to this. He was a guy that didn't seem to have any issues with media or anybody else while he was in St. Louis.
No, he was great. And I don't I don't think he was somebody who especially enjoyed speaking with the media. Like and not that he disliked the media. I think it just wasn't in his like nature and his makeup as a human being, where talking. But he spoke when asked, and he would do scrums in the clubhouse as often as anybody, and he was really, really good. And remember the thing, like, this says a lot about him as a dude. A couple years ago, when there was trade speculation about him, he spoke with the media, and then like Mo kind of left some stuff out there, and he didn't speak, and Arenado left the clubhouse, came back in to talk with the media again. This was leading into that offseason where he had to decide if he was going to opt in or not. That's the time period. And yeah, he had left the clubhouse, and then he came back in to kind of clear up just whatever misconceptions that there might be out there, or explain where he was coming from. That's that says a lot about him. There are very, very, very few Major League Baseball players who have ever walked the face of the earth that have walked out of the clubhouse and said, you know what, I don't think I fully explained myself to the media. Let me go back in and make sure they understand where I'm coming from.
Yeah, most of them are just going to take that opportunity to get out of Dodge.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that was good. I remember, yeah, that was a difficult situation for him. You know, he opted into staying in St. Louis a number of times. He kind of engineered his way to St. Louis. So I think we all wish that it had gone better. But hopefully hopefully that success comes. Um, so in Arizona. So he's been. I'll ask you this because I don't know that we're going to have this discussion for a while yet. But I started thinking about it. You know, when he came to St. Louis, I think we thought, okay, he's going into the Hall of Fame, and he might just do it with the Cardinal cap. That's not probably going to happen now. But is he? Do you believe that he'll be a Cardinal Hall of Famer?
Yeah, so we can have the discussion about him and Goldschmidt, which I think, and Goldschmidt won an MVP as a Cardinal, so he's got a little bit more of a case. And Goldschmidt has one more year. No, I guess they're the same because Arenado spent one more year with. So there's I think so. I think he is. I also don't know like who does he go into the Hall of Fame with a hat? I don't truly know how he feels about the Colorado Rockies. I know for a fact that the Rockies are very good at making players not like the organization for some things that they do. They just are there. There was even something I just read it today. Where Chris Bryant could not attend the 2015 Cubs reunion because the Rockies told him he couldn't do it. Whereas there were other active players, like Kyle Schwarber was there and somebody else was there. But the Rockies tell Bryant that no, you can't go be part of this this thing. Like the Rockies do weird things like that because evidently they just love to offend players. I guess I don't know. I mean, it's and I worked in the Rockies organization for a while at their AAA club, and they just always do things their weird way. And maybe I'm being unfair. Maybe there's no malicious intent in there.
It's the thin air.
Yeah, it's something. So I don't. Yeah, he wanted out of there. I don't completely know how he feels. He had that 2022 season that he had was really, really good when he was top 3 in the MVP voting. We'll see how much career he has left in him. But to me, like I know he has more time with the Rockies than the Cardinals. If he has anything against the Rockies, I think he goes in either as a Cardinal or with a blank hat. I don't know. So, but yeah, Cardinal Hall of Famer. I think so. Especially when you consider they're still at a point right now in that every year when we get like the fan ballot, there's a bunch of dudes on there that are very, very, very deserving of the honor. But we're in a period right now where the Cardinals are not winning at a super high level. So when you get post Pujols, post Molina, post Wainwright, there's kind of an open window here, and maybe somebody like Mason Wynn's going to have a career, and maybe JJ Weatherholt, but there's a little bit of a gap here. So this is a really long answer, and it shouldn't be because I'm sure you have a lot of questions today, and I could have answered this in about 20 seconds. But yeah, I think when all is said and done, he does end up in the Cardinal Hall of Fame.
Okay, yeah, and I think so, but it is interesting, right? I mean, you know, just because the first couple of years, the first 3 probably were very, very good, and then that last little bit though, those last 3 kind of overshadow everything else. I mean, we always remember how things end more than how they begin, I think, and so, but I feel like he's also a guy that after 3, 4, 5 years down the road, people are going to remember him a lot more fondly probably than they would, yesterday when he was, or, in the middle of the season when he's struggling.
They should. And look, my contention is that somebody with the organization, whether it was Oliver Marmol or somebody above him, should have kind of stepped in at some point and limited his playing time because he wants to play so much and he plays so hard that here at the end of his career, I think his body would break down. I mean, just go look at the bat speed numbers from last year. He spent all of last off season trying to get that bat speed up, and it was pretty darn good right at the beginning of the season. And then it really didn't take all that long for it to start to come back to where it was. And obviously he dealt with some injuries last year. If I could hop in the DeLorean and do it all over again, I would love to see what Arenado's production looked like if somebody could step in, give him more days off, and if he could find a way, and this would be the toughest part, if he could find a way to embrace the idea of having some days off.
Yeah, that would be the hard part because you're right. He's a guy that doesn't want to get out of there. Do you think it would have been at least easier for Ollie to at least maybe try to broach that, especially in the last year or so, if Nolan Gorman had clicked like they thought he would?
Um, hmm. The answer should be yes. The answer should be yes. I they they do everything they can to help veterans kind of do it the way they want to do it. So like, if Nolan Gorman was forcing his way into the lineup at some point in time, that was going to do something. But at the same time, like not that Gorman was ever great last year, but there was a stretch of time last year where, and it wasn't even debatable that Nolan Gorman was the best hitter on the team. Now it didn't last that long. It lasted a few weeks or a month or 5 weeks. I'd have to go back through the day by day. But I remember living in the moment and and running like the numbers on what he had done in his last however many games. And it was pretty obvious that Gorman was the best hitter on the team during that kind of small period. He had a tough end of the season. He didn't have a great start to the season. I mean, the numbers were not there for Gorman. But even when that was going on, it didn't feel like he was forcing his way into the lineup. So I want to say yes, because it makes sense that the guy who's got the best numbers is going to play the most. But I feel like there's a track record of veterans get to kind of set their own program.
Yeah, that has definitely been a case for a number of years. I'm going to be interested to see maybe, especially with Chaim Bloom in charge, if that changes some. I mean, granted, there's not exactly a lot of veterans around now to be forcing their way into things, but if that ever rolls into being a situation again, probably a few years down the road, will a different front office approach it differently?
That's so taking that, but then expanding it. One of the things that I'm really interested in this year is, and I can't give like any exact things, but there are going to be situations that play out, and we're going to watch how Oliver Marmol specifically handles them. And sometimes he's going to handle them the way he's always handled them, and sometimes he's going to handle them differently. And we're all going to start to learn, okay, this was something that John Mozeliak was really pushing, and this is something that either Oliver Marmol really believes in or Chaim Bloom and John Mozeliak agree on. Like, you can't differentiate between those two things. But just, I'm going to be so interested to see if there are like philosophical differences and if things are done a little bit differently when the person above Ollie is different. And the veteran thing obviously is one of those. I think you're right. It's hard to see that one because there's not veterans available at some point. I'm a fan of Oliver Marmol, so I'll say hopefully at some point we will be able to see that play out. But there are going to be other things that we're going to see this year that are going to start to give us some answers on, okay, that was a Mo thing or that was an Ollie thing.
Yeah, and the focus is going to be so different. It's not a we go. This is the first time that I can think of in forever almost that they go into the season without a chance to really contend. Like you said, upper ceiling is a 500, and even that's probably asking for a lot. In the last couple of years and of most tenure, it felt like he kept trying to put the Band-Aid on it, trying to, you get Sonny Gray and Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson, and you got enough pitching that maybe you can be that 88 win team. The whole approach this year is going to be completely different.
It is, and although I don't, I get messages all the time at KMOX. So this is going to be, they're going to lose 100 games. They're going to lose 110 games. I'm not here telling you that they're going to be an above 500 team that makes the playoffs. Those are not the words that are about to come out of my mouth. I think I am connected to reality enough to assess this team. That being said, if goal number one is just to avoid a horrendously terrible win-loss record like you had a few years ago, from a starting pitching standpoint, I think they're better off. You don't have Miles Michaelis, you don't have Eric Fetty, and we'll see where Andre Palante is. But just based off what Palante did, especially in the second half of the season last year, there's three guys who are giving you terrible starts fairly frequently. And now with the group that they have and the depth that they have, starting pitching should be better. We'll see what happens with the bullpen. That was promising down the stretch last season, and a lot of those guys are back.
Mm-hmm.
I have no clue how they're going to score runs. That's the issue here. When people look at this team as a team that's going to have a really, really bad season, it's connected to the lack of scoring runs, and I'm not running away from that. I don't know how they're going to score runs. Ivan Herrera full season would help. JJ Weatherholt having some sort of impact right away would help. Nolan Gorman or Jordan Walker taking that step forward that we were asking for him this time last year would help, but there's nothing guaranteed. So I'm not talking about this team all of a sudden being a 90-win season, but to think that they're going to, be way, way, way off of what they were last year, where they're going to win 10 or 15 games less this season compared to last season, I don't see that, because I think the starting pitching is better.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of leads me to a question I had been thinking about. You've done this for a little while. You did open line in 23. You did open line last year. Was there differences in the way that people handled a losing season in those 2 years? And do you think there'll be a difference even more so this year?
I think a lot of times there's an agenda in the complaint. So, and that's where this feels a little bit different, because there are so many people that are just relieved that John Mozeliak is not around anymore. So when you go back to 23 and things were really going poorly, trust me, there was a lot of people who disliked John Mozeliak, but the fervor was not there like it was this past season. Also, this past season, don't forget, and I know you didn't. I don't say that to you. I know you. Listeners. They had a really good month of May, and they were actually in playoff position for a while, and they were hanging around a playoff spot for a while. Like I don't think the two seasons are totally comparable until you get into like the final month of this past year, where post trade deadline, it started to become very clear and very evident that this was not going to be a playoff club. So it's hard for me to compare how people were feeling. The first one was kind of a punch in the gut, a slap in the face, whatever you want to call it, because they were coming off a 22 season that was really good. And even though you had a couple guys walk out the door, you felt like that had been replaced, even though it hadn't been. Whereas last year it felt and last year, just the fact that it was Mo's final season was that was hanging over everything. And I think a certain part of the fan base was like, there were definitely a group of people that they would have been happy if John Mozeliak would have announced his resignation one day before the season got started, because it was one last day with him in that job. Like it did not matter if it was going to be his final season or not. And those people existed, but there were more people who were just kind of accepting of what was going on, knowing that it was kind of weird and it was taking a long time, but there was actually a transition going on.
Yeah. I mean, we do like to, call ourselves best fans in baseball. And part of that is trying to be knowledgeable about things. And again, it kind of circles back to what we were talking about at the very beginning. Not everybody is going to be as in tune with all the changes and stuff that is going to, as other people. But I think you would like to think that the people that are paying attention are going to be more accepting of this because there's a clear plan. I mean, again, whether this plan works or not, we don't know. We may be doomed for a decade of this, but at least they know that they're not trying to patch with veterans past their prime, and there's a totally different approach going into the season.
Yeah, and look, there's people out there who would love that think that this team should be going for at least a playoff spot or going for the division on an every year basis, no matter what. And they disagree with the idea of the rebuild. And if some version of the Kyle Gibson and Lance Lynn signings were to occur, they would celebrate that. And when a Nolan Arenado gets traded, they despise that. And like, not to be a smart aleck about it, but my like, they lost more games than they won
Mhm.
with Nolan Arenado, with Sonny Gray, with Wilson Contreras. Well, they can do that without those guys as well. I agree with them. My belief would go hand in hand with them that you get closer to winning a World Series on the path they're on. There's two different paths you could be on. They're not on the fastest path to get back into the playoffs. If they really wanted to be a legit playoff contender this year, they could do that. They could go overspend for some veterans and hope that it all works out like they did the Lynn and Gibson year.
Mhm.
So this is not, they are not on the fastest path back to the playoffs, but I would contend that they are on the fastest path to getting back to being a legitimate championship contender.
We've talked about how some people viewed the end of Mo's tenure. What were your thoughts about that, especially over the last couple of years, and being around him a little bit?
Yeah. Man, I
Don't worry, he doesn't listen to this, so you're fine.
uh, no, I've been very like, if I want to find criticism of this organization in recent history, it's that they did not keep up with the times. It's
Mhm.
that they let things go. The lack of data and technology compared to other organizations, the lack of coaching in the minor leagues, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of forward thinking, the lack of outside the box thinking, like all of that. And I have been critical of him, and I've been critical of the club, and I I think he is responsible for that, and the DeWitts are responsible for that. While at the same time, I say that, I also think very highly of all those individuals. I think very highly of the DeWitts as owners. They lost their way a little bit with the organization in recent years. They stuck with a model for way too long, and then it all imploded. And I would have liked for them to be doing the stuff they're doing now a little bit sooner, because then you could have avoided everything that the organization is going through. So I'm not afraid to be critical of them, and I
Mhm.
think if you are not critical of them, I don't think you're paying attention, because obviously the team got here somehow, some way, and there were people involved in it happening. And it's very easy to watch the corrections that are taking place right now. And the corrections are connected to things that were done by those individuals. So I say all that to say this: I like John Mozeliak a lot, both personally in our in my opportunities to talk with him, certainly professionally. It was time for a change. I think he knew as much as anybody that it was time for a change. I remember sitting, I tell this story all the time. I remember sitting in his suite at the winter meetings a few years back when, because he would speak with the media every night during the
Mhm.
winter meetings. And we were talking about the team, and he said, well, this will test our model. Yeah, it tested the model, and the test was failed. Like,
Yeah.
it wasn't going to work anymore. I think there was so much respect between the DeWitts and Mozeliak that they signed him to a contract. He was going to finish the terms of his contract. Like, and he was going to do the best job that he could under basically the working conditions that were being given to him. Would the organization had been in a better spot if maybe they would have cut ties with him or moved on from him at a sooner time? So what the organization is doing now, where they're really, creating a blank slate on the major league roster and trying to go from there. If they would have done this 1 year or 2 years ago, would they be further along right now? They probably would, because you would have already been started in that process. But I respect Mo for saying, I was hired to do a job. I was hired. The contract says that my employment ends on this date, and I'm going to continue to work through that date no matter what. He was incredibly self aware on what fans thought about him. He made jokes about it
Mhm.
at times. So I I think I've used the word lament a few times. I lament, I guess, a lot of things, but I lament the fact that a guy who was so important to the Cardinals and was such a big part of them winning so many games, that unfortunately the model he was using put him in a position where it didn't work anymore. So the end of his tenure skews the overall body of work in a pretty negative way. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think it kind of goes with what we were saying a little bit ago about veterans getting to do what they want to do, right? I mean, Mo had earned the right to fill out his contract and earned the right to not necessarily go through a rebuild. Try to do the best he could to try to continue to put things on there. And I'm sure that his tenure would have looked at a lot differently if he had left in, you know, 2015,
Hmm.
2016, 2019, something like that, even if he went before COVID, or if he had transitioned to president of baseball operations the way he thought he was going to, and Michael Gersh had taken over more of that role, and he had been, maybe a little bit less of the face of the last few years. But I mean, it is what it is, right? And again, Mo's a Cardinal Hall of Famer. He may be a Major League Hall of Famer, but after 18 years, anything will go south. I wrote a post. Oh, it's been 5 or 6 years ago about the Cardinals being insular because they just kind of promoted from within
Hmm.
and brought just didn't seem to go out and get anybody from other organizations, and it really cost them. And now we're seeing them realize that mistake and go out and poach from a lot of different places.
Yeah, and I think the other part of that too is the fact that they were so good and they were
Hmm.
so smart and they were doing things better than the better than the industry. So it wasn't just that they were promoting from within, it was that they were losing the best of the best to other organizations, and they were filling those positions just from within. And they, I'm so glad. And I think something that isn't talked about a lot, I bring it up every once in a while. So they bring in Rob Serfolio, they
Hmm.
bring in Chaim Bloom, and these, for them, not completely, the people that they've also brought in, it's not like it's only been people from the Red Sox organization and people from the Cleveland organization. There have been people from those organizations that have been brought in, but it's not like Heim brought his entire front office over. It's not like
Right.
Rob
Hmm.
Serfolio brought, there's just a bunch of Cleveland dudes. Like there's people from all over the place. So the cronyism that exists so often in sports and our world and everything, they've stayed away from that. And collaboration is a word that is used a lot with Heim, and I think it's a real thing. I know Heim a little bit. I really enjoy it when I get the chance to talk with him. But it's not like we're best pals. I'm getting to know him as he
Right.
continues to be in this role, but I think it's genuine. I don't think it's just lip service. When he talks about wanting to hear all the voices in the room, I think that's a real thing. I think he really, really wants to hear every dissenting opinion, every agreeing opinion, and everything in between. And when you are challenged, that makes you better. And Heim does not seem to be afraid of being challenged.
Well, I mean, if you've worked in Boston, you don't have to worry about having a thin skin, right? I mean, he
No.
he was definitely challenged in that role, especially, again, with the constraints as we always talk about of having to trade Mookie Betts. I gotta admit, I gotta feel like he's just glad to come to St. Louis where there's just one paper and a little bit less of a media presence, perhaps. But yeah, and I think it probably helps, the fact that he spent a year in the organization trying to figure out what was wrong, and then spent a year in the organization doing a little bit of player development before he took that role on. I mean, one, he gets to know the organization, but two, to go back to what you're saying, he didn't have an office to bring in, right? I mean, it kind of kept that temptation away because he hadn't been working with X, Y, and Z immediately. He's been out of that role for a little bit.
He has, and I give him credit that there's certainly been people in the organization that have moved on, but
Hmm.
he's held on to a lot of people. A lot of those people have had their roles and their titles changed, but it feels like he everybody gets their job for a reason. Like we talked a moment ago about people in the Cardinals maybe being promoted as opposed to going to the outside. That doesn't mean that they were bad at their jobs. That doesn't mean
Hmm.
that they didn't deserve to be in the organization. When you get a job in Major League Baseball, you're rarely on scholarship. There's generally a reason that you got that job. So I think Heim has done. It would have been really easy to move on. You just mentioned Mike Gersh. It would have
Hmm.
been incredibly easy to move on from Gersh. In many ways, Gersh kind of became the scapegoat when he lost the general manager title going into Mo's final season, and he got the special assistant for special projects or whatever that title was. It would have been really easy for Gersh, out of respect for Mo, stick around for the year. I would think maybe he had a contract that had a year left or something, and then go on. And I've heard from many people that Gersh has had many other opportunities in other facets of baseball as well. But Chaim says, you know what, we see value in you. We know that you can do something, and they keep him in the organization in a role that everybody's comfortable with. And I think that happened across even on the major league staff. They moved a couple guys to game planning or strategy, whatever the roles are. They found roles and they found opportunities to most use individual skill sets. And I think that's a credit to this current regime and Chaim for making sure that you don't allow good people to walk out the door.
Yeah, because there is that temptation, and again, maybe it lends to the fact that he's been in the organization a little bit, but there is that temptation to just clean house and bring in everybody, right? And I think that's what we went into this off season kind of expecting, maybe that he would do that in the manager's spot, right? That Ollie Marmol not being his guy, he would want to go ahead and maybe put a stamp on it. And he didn't, in part maybe as they say, because Marmol has the development background. But I think it's just very interesting to see him, saying it doesn't matter that I didn't hire you if you can do the job.
Yeah, and I think they're pretty like-minded because I've been around Ollie a lot, and I feel like I have a pretty good idea of his baseball beliefs and his baseball philosophies. I think he's good at the job. He's not perfect. There are certainly things I've already talked about. One of them, the fact that they kind of allow veterans to do whatever they do. Like there are things that Ollie does that I'm not always the biggest fan of, but that would be true of no matter who is managing the club. I really like Ollie, and I think they spent a lot of time together because Chaim was in the organization. So I would assume that just the organic nature of relationships and friendships, that when those two guys are together a lot, because I think they are very like-minded and very much on the same page, that it was going to become pretty clear that it's a relationship that can and should and will work out. Now, I'm not jumping into if the Cardinals extend Ollie just so he doesn't go into a lame duck year. I got my animals mixed up into a lame duck year. If they extend him, that's fine. But I'm not sitting here thinking they have to. If they don't extend him, like they can do it whenever they want. The relationship is going to be different. Chaim has never been Ollie's boss. They've been in kind of a different spot. So let this thing play out for a little while. But from what I know about those two guys, I think this has the opportunity to present itself as a really good partnership. And that's actually, I want the Cardinals to win, generally speaking. But one of the reasons I am really rooting for this rebuild and the return to competitiveness to happen at a quicker rate, no matter how much Chaim might like Ollie, no matter how much they might be on the same page, no matter how much of what's going on might not be Ollie's fault, there is a line at some point that you cross that you can't go back over. Like at some point in time, if you have not won enough games over a certain period of time, it's just going to be a change. I think we saw that in Pittsburgh with Derek Shelton. Derek Shelton's a very good manager, but it finally got to a point where he hadn't been winning in Pittsburgh for a long enough time that you had to make a change. As somebody who likes Oliver Marmol, I don't want that to happen in St. Louis. And I don't know what that line is. There's leash, there's runway, there's whatever word you want to use. Like they know what this team is going to be. I don't think they go finish under 500 this year, and that automatically means he's not back the next year. So it's a line that I don't know where it's at, but I also don't want him to get close to it.
Yeah. There's that line, and then there's the other side of things, right? I mean, we've seen in the past where a team sticks with a guy like Marmol for the development phase, and then as they get closer to winning, maybe they need that, they need that other voice. They need that veteran voice or something like that. Now, I think Ollie could do both. Don't get me wrong, but there is that, that Joe Madden coming into to Chicago type
Sure.
of thing that could happen. And again, that's way down the line, and I don't know that that's necessary. But I mean, it's something to, I guess, put in the back of the head.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that might be more connected to if they are finally at a place where they are ready to compete and the team's not winning enough games, then it's a lot easier to make that decision. I hope it does, but no manager manages forever. At some point, every voice starts to lose its impact a bit. So, we'd be naive to sit here and say that 15 years from now, Oliver Marmol is likely to be the St. Louis Cardinals manager. But what about 5 years from now? Like that, is he still there in that spot? And that's what I'm somewhat curious about.
Yeah, it's a rare manager that gets to pick when he leaves. But then again, St. Louis managers have had that history as well of being there a long time and then deciding when they want to walk out. So we will see. Couple of things off the field, as it were. You're in KMOX. KMOX, has been the voice of the Cardinals forever and ever and ever. Except for that little blip.
Yeah, there's that 5-year dark period.
Yeah,
where
but we
don't
won't
talk about that.
That's right. How much do you pay attention to what's happening on the TV side? Obviously, that's in a lot of turmoil right now.
Yeah, I pay a lot of attention. I'm a media nerd, so that bring like literally I read trade magazines from the media industry when I'm sitting there doing nothing. So I'm a media nerd. So my connection to Cardinals broadcasting plus my nerdum for the media business makes this something that I am incredibly interested in, and also changing trends in media is something that I'm very interested in. So I pay a lot of attention to it for sure. I've got to, you can ask whatever you want. I've got opinions on it, but I feel like I can speak intelligently on the situation.
Well, I mean, it kind of open ended on however, because obviously, the Cardinals have stepped away from the Main Street sports. They could go back, they could go to MLB, they could do anything, but it seems like no matter what, that whole broadcast is going to change at least somewhat. It's not going to be just picked up from where it was last year. So, I mean, where do you see that going?
Yeah, we're in a really weird spot right now. And the other side of this too is they're trying to set things up where all the media rights deals across Major League Baseball are basically going to come up at the same time, because Rob Manfred really wants there to be more of a national feel to these games, and he wants more outlets that are broadcasting games, and we've already seen that with some of the different outlets that they've added. The media industry is in a really weird spot, and a lot of this is I saw this on social media recently, and I was thinking about it when what kind of started this was obviously the cord cutting resulted in the rights fees not being as high back to the cable channel, because so many people out there that didn't even watch baseball, didn't watch sports, were paying for it because it was on the cable system. So all of a sudden those numbers start to drop in a major way. And then years ago, Fox decided that they were going to sell off a lot of their assets. And that's when the studios went to Disney and a bunch of other things. And the RSNs were part of that. ESPN wanted to buy the RSNs. The government actually stepped in at that point, and because of they try to avoid monopolies, they stopped ESPN from buying them. That's my first big what if. What if the government would allow ESPN to buy all the regional sports networks? Because then you would have had competent adults in the room who know how to run cable channels and know how to produce sports and know how to cross promote and know how to do all these things. If ESPN would have been controlling these regional sports networks, I'm not sure that they go into the extreme decline as quickly as they did under Sinclair. Pretty obvious that Sinclair was in over their head from the first moment, but they bought them at the worst possible time because that was right in front of the cord cutters, the fall of all things media because of cord cutting. So that brings us to now. I mean, a bunch of stuff has happened, bankruptcies, all that most people listening to this probably don't care about. But the teams knew this was coming, and the Major League Baseball has been setting things up for teams to move on from these RSNs anyways. This was not going to be a long-term thing, but it's happened a little bit quicker now, especially, the Cardinals took what, a 25% haircut just last year to stay on what is now FanDuel. And then a year later, they can't even make the rights payments. So some people out there have got to figure out what the model needs to be, how much money you can actually make, and then the organizations need to go from there. There's going to be other financial avenues to make up that money. Sports gambling is one area where, especially in St. Louis, that's added revenue. The national TV dollars are going to go up and up and up and up and up. I'm sure Major League Baseball looks at the deal that the NBA just got and is just salivating because Major League Baseball gets better ratings than the NBA. So if the NBA was able to put together the media rights deal they did, if Major League Baseball knows what they're doing, they're going to be able to get at least that, if not more, and that's going to bring in a lot more money. But at least in the short term, you're talking about major loss of revenue if you don't stay with the RSNs. Now, speaking just from an opinion standpoint, if the option to go back to FanDuel right now is something where there is a prerequisite for the deal to be put in place that FanDuel finds a buyer, and then they still don't want to pay rights fees for multiple quarters down the road, and then they want to do more of a revenue share as opposed to a rights fee. I don't know how that would work with the Cardinals because, as reported in the Post-Dispatch, the Cardinals had already taken all their sales in-house. So if they stay with FanDuel, the FanDuel folks won't be selling Cardinals broadcast anymore. All the sales are going to go through the Cardinals. I personally, if I'm making that decision, as much as I don't want to walk away from 100% of my rights fees, I probably would, and hope that I make up some of that money in my local sales on what I'm going to do in selling the broadcast. But I think we all understand that no matter how well they do selling it from inside of the offices at Busch Stadium, the money they make right away is not going to equal either the rights fees they previously were getting or even the rights fees that they're being promised on this next deal. But I wouldn't get in business with these people who have already basically declared bankruptcy a couple times and have all these various things. I can say all this, and it's going to have an impact on the Cardinals from a bottom line standpoint inside those walls. But from a fan standpoint, whether they're back with FanDuel or whether they do the MLB media thing, the games are still going to be on a cable channel. It might be a different cable channel, but if you've watched the games on cable or DirecTV or whatever, it's still going to be there. And if you've watched the games on streaming, because FanDuel had the streaming app this past year, there's going to be a streaming app for you. It's going to be a different streaming app, but it's going to be a streaming app. You're going to utilize the same technology to get in. It's going to be about the same price. So that's a really long answer. I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but there you go.
Yeah, I think it's always been very interesting to me because, I'm here in Arkansas, for the longest time, the last couple of years. Last year I was able to get the FanDuel, but the 2 years before that, I didn't even get to watch because of cord cutting and all that other stuff. So being able to get rid of the blackouts and all that kind of stuff is big. And so I'm very interested to see what they do. I agree. You're right. From the fan point of view, it's not going to matter. And for the team point of view, it honestly probably couldn't have happened at a better time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when you're looking at a payroll that is around 100 and about 40% of that is being paid to people that aren't even here, this is the time to take a rights hit. If they had a payroll that was more in the 180, 190 range, they would feel that a lot more.
Okay, so let's put that in, and then also let's go to a hypothetical situation where the financial constructs of Major League Baseball completely change after the next CBA. I don't think there's going to be a salary cap, but I do think there's going to be different tax thresholds, and I think there's going to be different tax percentages where it's almost going to be like, for many teams there is a salary cap because there's so many teams that just won't touch the tax. After this next one, I think there's going to be more teams that do that. So if you're and that should bring some level of competitiveness back to baseball. The question is, what are the Dodgers? You need to do something that's going to change the actions of the Dodgers. If it doesn't change the action of the Dodgers, well, then you haven't really accomplished anything. But if you do all that stuff, so then the financial constructs of Major League Baseball are different. There's the playing field gets evened out a little bit. If you're the Cardinals, you get to go through this period where you're losing TV rights, and you get to walk in basically like a year early because you're not spending money this year. You get to walk in a year early to kind of what the financial situation is going to look like moving forward. I think you're right. This is the perfect time for all this stuff to be happening.
And to go along with that, maybe the local media scene has changed as well this offseason, had a couple of major defections. We just heard this week, Alexa Dot going out to Washington, and then, of course, Katie Wu headed out because the Dodgers take everybody out to LA. Obviously you deal with them, deal with that. What's that going to be like for you? And, what was it like to hear them were going?
Yeah, first off, they're my friends, so I don't get to see my friends as often, which stinks. This is an industry, both the media industry and the sports industry. It's one where people come and go very regularly. In fact, St. Louis has been somewhat insulated by that, but you go into other and it's changing a little bit now in St. Louis. There's not quite as many like long-term legacy type people here as there were previously, and that all comes back to the media industry being in a weird state right now. But this is very normal for people to take new jobs and to leave and to do all that sort of stuff. For Katie, it's a great opportunity because she gets to go back to her home state and she gets to cover the Dodgers, top team baseball. She's still breaking Cardinal stories all the time. So,
Yeah.
she's still very connected to St. Louis. It'll be interesting to see what the Athletic does. Everything I've heard says that they do plan to fill that role at some point in time, but I haven't heard anything beyond that. And essentially, Katie is still sort of the de facto Cardinals reporter working, as the Dodgers reporter and doing a very good job of it. With Alexa, it's a chance for her to go back home as well as she went to she grew up in very close to that area, grew up a Nationals fan, went to University of Maryland. So, her situation in St. Louis had changed when the Blues made their weird broadcast decision to go to a simulcast of radio and TV.
Yeah.
She was one of the people that lost some time there. So it's a chance for her to go home. And as somebody who was working with the Milwaukee Brewers but grew up in St. Louis, I understand that. The moment, the opportunity arose for me to come home to the city that I grew up in and to cover the team that I grew up absolutely loving and the team that is responsible for my love of the game of baseball, I jumped at it. So I know Katie wasn't a Dodgers fan growing up. She was more in NorCal than Southern California. But still, it's her home state. For Alexa, it's an opportunity to go back home. So as sad as I am that I won't be seeing them on an everyday basis, I'm super happy for their opportunities.
You said that there's not necessarily as many legacy people around, although there are still some, and you get to deal with one of them on a regular basis with Bernie Michaelis. How has that been for you, especially for a guy that, like you said, grew up in St. Louis?
It's awesome. I read every word that Bernie Michaelis wrote when I was growing up. If he wrote a column, that was the first thing I was looking at. The peak of my week from a media reading standpoint was Saturdays and the Bernie bits. And he mentioned me in a Bernie bit a time or two as I was coming up as a broadcaster, and it was one of the coolest things in the world. Like beyond like my dad and beyond close family friends, there is nobody in the media industry that helped my love for sports more than Bernie Michaelis. Just growing up and reading him, and now I'm doing shows with him, and he's my friend. The other day he texted me asking me what I thought of something. I'm like, Bernie Michaelis wants to know what who cares he's Bernie Michaelis. Who cares what I think about this? So I know he respects me, and the fact that in a pretty short amount of time, we've developed a good friendship, and the fact I've always respected him so much. The fact that I know he has respect for me is one of the coolest full circle things I've ever experienced in my life. I worked when I was in high school. I worked at KFNS, the 590, as an overnight board operator. So I knew Mike Claiborne and Bob Ramsey and all these people who are still around. Scott Warman was another one. I had worked with them, so I had relationships with them since I was in high school, and we'd run into each other every once in a while. Maybe they'd be in Milwaukee for a Brewers game, so there was some contact with them. I never, ever, ever, ever worked with Bernie or said a word to him beyond me sending him an email trying to pitch myself for him to throw something in Bernie bits like he would do. That's how it worked, by the way. You would email him, and so for he's one of the few people in the market that I had zero relationship with, who I admired and respected so much. And it's been one of the coolest things about being back and him being at KMOX that I've been able to have this relationship with him.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It is really interesting to see, and Bernie's going to be on in a couple of weeks here with me, but it's really been very interesting to see him modify and adjust to the new media landscape, if you will. Especially when he's not doing a straight writing or straight. He's basically doing everything, and you like to the old saying is you don't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, Bernie put that to rest.
He writes 5 columns a week, which is most major newspaper columnists write 2 or 3, maybe 4. So he writes 5 columns a week. He writes a column every single weekday. He does his video show every single day, and he knows something interesting about every single thing that's happening in this world from a sports perspective. I don't think he sleeps much, and because he is just diving into the numbers every single day. We'll be doing Rush Hour Sports or Sports Open Line or something, and I'll bring something up, and he will just be able to bring up the most like esoteric statistic that you would ever think of. He spends his day just swimming in numbers and information and data, and some of these columns that he writes. I hope people go to STL Sports Central and read his columns, because honestly, so many of them are like little works of art, and it's pretty remarkable the amount of work that he puts in on an every single day basis, doing columns, doing streams, video streams, and then doing radio with KMOX.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. So, Matt, as we let you go, I assume, are you heading to Florida then sometime soon?
Yeah, I actually it's a busy time. This is winter warm-up Cardinal Caravan weekend, so I've got warm-up stuff on Saturday. I'm going out on Caravan. How close are you? I know you're not. How close are you to Jonesboro?
I'm on the other side of the state, unfortunately.
Right. That's a bummer, because I'll be in Jonesboro.
Yeah, I would love to go
for that. And then I just booked my travel for Jupiter. I'm going to leave. It's the day after the Super Bowl. I think that's like Monday the 9th, maybe, or Monday the 6th. It's the Monday after the Super Bowl. I get there. WBC pitchers and catchers have a voluntary report date either on that day or the next day, and then stuff starts happening after that. And I'm there for over a month. I don't get back until the 7th or 8th later on. So it's a lot of time away from St. Louis. It's tough on the family. I've got a wife and 2 daughters who, 1 month out of every year they don't see me, and that's a bummer. But I am very blessed with what I get to do, and I'm always excited to be able to go down and cover spring training.
And last question, when you're down there and going into the season, who's the one player that you're going to focus on the most?
Oh, that's a really good question. Probably, like, this is the easy one. It's probably JJ Weatherholt, because he means so much for this next era of Cardinals baseball, and that can start now. But I mean, there's a ton of the push forward candidates, and Walker and Gorman, and I think I'd put Scott in that bucket, and maybe Mason Wynn to a lesser extent. Watching the pitching and that there's going to be real competition for the starting rotation. I think there's 4 guys competing for 2 spots in the rotation, with the fact that Quinn Matthews and Liam Doyle are probably both going to be at AAA. pushing for that. So that whole thing is going to be interesting. And then I'm going to assume that Jojo Romero is not around. I guess that could change. But who takes the lead in terms of being the closer? I think that's likely Riley O'Brien. So I'll be keeping an eye on O'Brien. But I guess if I had to pick one, the answer is one player. I would go JJ Weatherholt.
I mean, that, like I said, that is a big one to keep an eye on, and it's going to be fun to watch.
Who would be yours? Sorry, I know you're asking me the questions, but who would be yours?
I mean, from a fan point of view, it's Mason Wynn because I'm just a huge Mason Wynn fan, and again, I'm of that era that watched Ozzie, and so shortstops, they appeal to me. I think the other, if I was just analytically, might be just seeing what Jordan Walker did, because it is so, if he has made, we always talk about, best shape of your life and the adjustments they make in the winter and all that kind of stuff. If it looks like that this is actually, whatever changes he needs to make are taking hold, that changes the equation a lot. And so I think that, from an analytical point of view, I would like to see what that looks like.
Okay. Good answer.
So, all right. Well, Matt, I appreciate you joining me. It's been a lot of fun to do this. Next week, Lynn Worthy joins us, and we will talk about all things Cardinals then. But until then, for Matt, I'm Daniel. Good night.
Arenado, deep left. Has he done it? Goodbye! A grand slam to end the night.
Two fastballs and decided to go breaking ball and hung it. What a night for the St. Louis Cardinals, coming all the way back. Down 2 in the ninth to Devin Williams to tie it. And a walk-off slam